Hi, I'm Dennis Weiss. We are at the Eisenhower Presidential Library Museum and Boyhood Home for Like Ike. And as I walked into the room today, I saw my crew, Troy, Pam. We'll talk more about them in a second. But the first thing I saw was the incredible photos that you have prepared for us today. What an inspiring backdrop for the people to see here. So, welcome, Troy Elkins. What do you do?
I'm the acting registrar, basically, at the museum. I'm the person in charge of making sure all the artifacts are properly cared for and put on exhibit and stored.
Very cool. Pam Sanfilippo, we've been with you a number of times. Tell the people what you do.
I'm the education specialist working with all the school groups that come to.
So we have been shooting these programs and putting them on TV and the internet to expose people who may not come here on their feet as often as you and I do, to be able to see what is here, and our title says it all. Why Like Ike? Wow, there's a million reasons, and we've got a few to talk about today. So, Troy, what is our subject for this show?
Today's subject, we're going to talk about the creation of NASA and the effect that the launching of Sputnik in 1957 had on creating the space race and how Eisenhower responded to that.
What a great topic. I was launched in 1957 too, just so you know. It was a good year. A lot of movies have been made about this topic that have included this topic anyway, but it was the seminal event in the trip of mankind towards the future, wasn't it?
It was definitely a reorientation. The International Geophysical Year was planned to start in July of 1957 and go through December of 1958. And the U.S. had planned as early as 53 to 54 of putting a satellite into space for civilian research purposes. And once the information got out, the Soviet Union agreed on that, but they decided they were going to try to get one up first.
As in my view, as well they should. You know, the competition for the future is what makes the future possible.
Yes.
Yeah. So we didn't sit quiet. So we have some artifacts here on the table. I'm sure somebody's going to explain to the camera what they are. But the Eisenhower administration was front and center on putting America in space in a big way.
Yes.
Yeah, and as Troy mentioned, the International Geophysical Year was planned years in advance, and one of the key, I have a quote from Eisenhower that I think really says it all. This is, he talks about the international cooperation, that more than 70 countries were going to participate in this special year of scientific research, and he said that the most important result of the International Geophysical Year is that demonstration of the ability of peoples of all nations to work together harmoniously for the common good. I hope this can become a common practice in other fields of human endeavor. That was in one of his radio and TV addresses. So it wasn't just the scientific advances, it was the advances in working as a world of nations cooperating.
We've made several Why Like Ike series in this room, and we've talked about everything from combat to NASA. If you look at Eisenhower as a president and the fellow who did what, well, this is so much a part of that what. Eisenhower front and center on trying to take the world from war to cooperation. And you could say from war to peace, but that wasn't Eisenhower's real genius. His genius was peace through cooperation, and this is a great example of a specific thing that he hoped people would get behind all across the world.
Right, and recognizing that this was taking place in the midst of the Cold War,
right,
as well.
Yeah, so interesting. So tell us a little bit about the physical things we have, about why they're here and why they represent Eisenhower.
Well, actually, we have quite a varied collection for this. The first thing I'll show off is probably the thing that's standing out most is the hard hat that's sitting here. This is the hard hat that was issued or given to President Eisenhower when he visited the Marshall for the dedication of the Marshall Space Center, which was previously Redstone Arsenal in Alabama.
Right.
And so this is the picture behind us of Eisenhower wearing this helmet, and actually this is his guest badge as well, that even has President Eisenhower written on it, so everyone knew who he was.
Isn't that something?
And this is significant because this is the first time the president was able to sit down with Wernher von Braun and talk to him about the advancement of the space program. And out of this little talk, because they really never saw eye to eye, but because of this little talk, they both got on the same page as to why a certain missile, which would become important later, the Saturn missile, was so important. And out of that meeting, the funding for the Saturn missile, Eisenhower started improving drastic increases, which as fiscally conservative as he was towards spending on defense projects, this was a major step for NASA.
For the purposes of continuity of Why Like Ike, we filmed with the picture of Wernher von Braun behind us before Pam. But for people who don't know, that was an acquisition from World War II, that fellow.
Yes.
That was Mr. Hitler's rocket specialist who really brought that technology to the West. Not that we weren't working on it, but he was at that time the best in the world.
Right. He was actually not a forced acquisition by NASA from the Army, but pretty much there's a political game that went on between. You still had a very large divergence of minds between the Army, the Air Force, and NASA over who's going to handle which space projects. Wernher von Braun was working with the Army in their ballistic missile program. And within 2 years of the creation of NASA had been able to finagle him and his entire team away from the Army and put him to work building on future projects for NASA.
Wouldn't that make a great book to be researched at the Eisenhower Presidential Library? Somebody ought to write that book about that transition. And because that struggle over what his talents would be aimed at first and best decided the future in such an impactful way, of which NASA is our topic today, certainly benefited from that decision. And I'm thinking the guy in a hard hat probably had a lot to do with that.
Well, and I think there was the whole debate as to whether, in making the decision to create a space agency, an aeronautical agency, whether it would be under the military or whether it would be civilian. And Eisenhower was really the one to push for it to be a civilian agency. He recognized that both were important, but that the military could handle their own, and it was a civilian agency that was better able to do what needed to be done.
It's been said many times by lots of people, including Eisenhower, and I don't remember his direct quote, or I'd try to use it, but nobody best understands the horrors of war other than the soldiers who were there. And he was certainly there. And his decisions as he became president and took over the civilian administration of our country, I see them were heavily influenced towards trying to make sure that another generation didn't have to experience the military life that he had of intercontinental war. And I see this decision in the same way. I think that Eisenhower, what Pam just said, he pushed von Braun towards the civilian side of rocketry. That's a man's desire for humankind to be benefited by peace, but he gave him something to do. He gave him a specific task. So what else have we got?
Okay, well, kind of continuing on with the power play between NASA and Air Force and who's taking control. A lot of the early satellites that went up were launched between, well, actually the first satellite the U.S. got in orbit was mostly an Army effort. And that was before the creation of NASA itself. but there were several different satellite projects going on. You had the Vanguard, you had the Explorer, and then you had the Discoverer project, which would eventually turn into the Corona, which is an intelligence-gathering photo reconnaissance satellite system. In 1960, August of 1960, Discoverer 13 was launched by the Air Force, and inside of it was this American flag, and it represents the first satellite that was launched and successfully recovered, which once they started being able to do that, they got the Corona project up and going, which would they put cameras with film in it, and they'd fly over, take pictures, and drop back in from space and be recovered and analyzed.
Right.
And this is just, this was given to Eisenhower on the 15th of August. The actual satellite itself was launched on the 10th, did 17 orbits around the Earth, and landed on the 11th, and 4 days later, this is in the President's hands.
Very interesting. And again, for people who are history buffs and enthusiasts like us, you know, this technology followed the U-2 spy plane task, if you will, and we talked about that last time I was in the room, but, you know, that's the connection. You had to put men over enemy airspace at risk in a U-2 spy plane. In a satellite, that you didn't have to do that. And you got the same or better results without putting people in direct harm's way. Again, I see that the same way as we discussed about Mr. Eisenhower as a president. He took a lot of steps to try to keep people safer.
So,
okay, who's next? What's up?
Okay. Well,
go ahead.
Anything? Okay, what we have left, basically, this all goes towards the mission to get to the moon.
Okay.
The first is this political cartoon, and it's titled "Do you ever see an elephant fly?" And it's Eisenhower forcing the GOP elephant into a rocket aimed at the moon.
Okay.
This was a public misconception of Eisenhower. He was not about single projects, about going to the moon. He even was hesitant about putting a man in space. His views of a space program were development of scientific research, reconnaissance and surveillance, and the main one was actually building capable, reliable ICBMs. And so he viewed the idea of putting a man in space, putting a man on the moon, as just something that was secondary. It was more important to get the surveillance. It was more important to get the satellites up and learn through the science of that than it was to put people on foreign bodies.
Okay.
And as part of his reason for that, or one of the comments that he made was, you know, what would be our purpose other than kind of propaganda saying we did this first to get a man on the moon? He said, we don't have any enemies on the moon. So that is a goal in and of itself wasn't his
I'm going to do a little pivot here.
Sure.
Your title of education specialist, when I see you, other than here in front of the camera, you've usually got a room full of kids. And I think of all the things that I'm enthused with about Eisenhower and this topic, and all I've already said on camera. Your job really is you're taking this information to the next generation. Maybe the most important job here is transferring knowledge to people as a museum and a library. So you work directly with kids. So tell us what you think about this, what you do, and how important it is that people understand these things in the education department here.
Well, my goal is to help make those connections. I mean, we are a learning institution for everyone who visits, real in person or virtually. Certainly our research collection and this topic of NASA and Sputnik are a couple of the projects that students can work on if they're doing their research, as our Abilene High School sophomores do each year. So it's helping to make those connections. And I want to say that one of my goals with this wonderful Why Like Ike series is to have lesson plans that teachers can show the YouTube video, and then you have some lessons that go along with these. So this is just a great opportunity for education here.
Terrific idea. You know, we shop talk, but we know at Eagle Communications, we talk all the time about the power of video, how it moves people along. Well, moves people to where, why? So that's where you come back in, Pam. I mean, this is a great thing to move somebody to, and the why is because young people need to know what happened in history and what went well and what didn't go well. And Eisenhower, all the Eisenhower, life and history of Eisenhower is a great example, which is why this institution is still setting researcher records just like that. So what a tremendous opportunity for you to be able to work with those young people. Okay, you know, I don't know how much time we got left. 4 or 5 minutes, maybe. Yep, 5 minutes. All right. You know, when we think about young people, they have to be. I read some research the other day that they want to connect to something that's real. They want real responsibility, not just a job with a title. You know, they want real responsibility. They want to actually make change. Gosh, Pam. The guy who probably presided over the biggest change in modern history of the United States of America is Dwight David Eisenhower, and it's right here in Abilene. So speak to what our topic today is space and NASA, and launching and recovering this flag, the United States of America flag, safely, the first. What's that led to, and what are you going to take that message to young people? How are you going to use it?
Well, for me, it's all about relevance, and they can see the beginnings of the space race. We're still talking about some of these things today. One of the things that interested me with the International Geophysical Year was and especially after the launch of Sputnik, was that Americans were saying that students were behind in science education. Sounds very familiar with the STEM education going on today. So. We can say this isn't something new. Science has always been important, and we recognized it during Eisenhower's administration as well.
You know, it's one thing to recognize a problem, but it's another thing entirely to decide what to do about it and then do it.
And he had a plan. They had a National Science Month in October of '58 during the geophysical year, and to encourage teachers to introduce more science into the classroom and all kinds of opportunities for them.
As I sat with you when you had the sophomores here last year, I happened to go, we filmed a series in that room a week or so later. And so, you know, I got to see that happen and then talk about it. But ever since then, I've had this thought, why just the sophomores? Gosh, there's such amount of material here that the upper sciences in the high school, what teacher couldn't use this? Right,
yes, and certainly, you know, we've been through colleges, the military groups at Fort Riley, Fort Leavenworth come over. We even had a group from Texas Tech come up and do some of our leadership programs. So, as I said, it's learning for everyone.
Yeah, well, it's always exciting to me to come here and to think about young people. When I walk through or come here to film is how much I enjoy this, but really, how will it change the future that Eisenhower and our community have built sustainability around the Eisenhower Presidential Library and Museum? Carl Weisenbach and I used to talk about this as friends, more than the business association, but what will the future be changed by the fact that Eisenhower Presidential Library is here and healthy or not? And I think the differences between those two are absolutely a gulf of decision and opportunity. So we're giving you out there behind the camera a great opportunity to know what's here, to see the faces of the people who are the experts in this material, and you can come talk to, not just me, you can come talk to these people too. But we're reminding you what a treasure, what a gift, what a privilege it is in our community to have the Eisenhower Presidential Library, Museum, Boyhood Home, and the 186,000 people who come here every year to look at this and to visit us. What a treasure we have. So there's lots of ways for you to contribute in dollars for the programs like this and education programs like Pam talked about. and for the preservation of the material that Troy Elkins has in front of him. All of those opportunities are available to you as a citizen to push the mission of cooperation and peace that Eisenhower spoke about with NASA. You can help too. Sign off. What do you want to say, Troy?
Well, just want to point out that by the time Eisenhower left office, there was a 3-to-1 ratio of U.S. satellites in orbit to Soviet satellites. Within a year of our first failed attempt to launch a satellite, we had an 8,000-pound satellite in orbit. And we had a president speak for the first time through a voice-recorded message via that same satellite.
Well, if you're going to get in a race, you might as well win it. That's good with me. Pam, sign-off comments?
Just come in and see what all's here. There's so much. I learn something every single day, and so can you.
So, folks, we appreciate the opportunity to film these for you. And the program title is Why Like Ike? There's a million reasons. Yours will be different from mine, but I assure you, if you take the time to engage with the library, with the staff here, you'll come away with that reason that's special to you. I'm Dennis Weiss. I work for Eagle Communications. Pam Sanfilippo, Troy Elkins. We're happy to have presented this to you today. We hope you have a great day.